welcome to everyone here in the call who takes the time this morning to listen to this final conference. I'm from the Darmstadt University of Applied Sciences, and I say hello also in the name of the team from the university. You will see many of them in the later presentations today, but you can already see here on the bubble that we have quite some disciplines participating in the project, because the goal of the project was to help the leather industry to move towards more sustainable chemistry along the leather supply chains. And today, I would say this is a very important milestone for this multi-stakeholder process. I say multi-stakeholder process because over the time, we had so many actors whom we participated. We say about 50 with whom we've been in very close contact. And it's an important milestone because this year the funding will end for the Darmstadt University. But we hope that this does not mean that this process will end, because actually this transformation has just begun. And but before we come to this, to the outlook, the task of this presentation is to show what happened so far under the title, We Can Work It Out, a vision for more sustainable chemistry in the leather supply chains. And I invite you to also visit our website and listen to recordings or read the information provided there on the first steps of this project, because we do not have the time today to go into the details of the let's say the first 2 years. That's why I will now provide a rather quick overview to, as Desiree said, just set a bit the scene. So the goal is move towards more sustainable chemistry, and in 2018 we first started with bilateral talks with many experts from the leather sector, and we also had a workshop to identify what are those challenges actually. And as anything in the context of leather, those challenges are quite complex. So I can just really touch upon the surface what is relevant now here for setting the scene. And the root cause of everything is that turning hide into a leather material that is functional on top, of course, requires some chemistry, reactive chemistry, and this chemistry often has adverse effects on human health and the environment, and this can cause problems if there are no proper risk control measures applied. And we know that, of course, there are such situations where the tanning process causes harm to health and the environment, whereas this happens mostly, not exclusively, but mostly in the global south. And controlling this issue is not so easy, because the supply chains are global and very complex and often also volatile. And as I said, this is really only the surface of the challenges to more sustainable chemistry, but I think those dots, this is also something where everyone can agree. So the question arises from the 2018 perspective. So if everyone agrees, what is holding us back to move towards more sustainable chemistry? And this is where our project comes into place, where we identified at the very start that there are different views among the players of the leather sector along the supply chains of what are the causes for those problems and how solutions could look like. And in other words, the leather sector as a whole, if you say so, does not pull together. But in such a situation, it is also not possible to have a systemic impact and to really move globally towards more sustainable leather chemistry. And this is where our project comes into place. And the claim always was that we want to help the leather industry make the transition to a more sustainable chemistry. And the first method that we applied in this respect was a scenario building process, because the aim was to help the actors develop or to help them align their perspectives of problems and help them align their goals so that we can work together to solve this. And in this scenario building process, we had some participants reflecting perspectives of the supply chain, and I'm happy that some of those who participated that very early are still part of the project and are even participating today in the conference. And I welcome you, as I said in the beginning, to check the material on our website if you want to learn more about the participants and also how this process works. For now, I will just briefly wrap up that we had 3 workshops in 2019, and first we refined the topic of more sustainable chemistry a bit, and we gave it a year goal. We said we want a more sustainable chemistry in the leather sector in 2035, and then we identified the most relevant factors that have an influence on this topic, and we did an analysis of how those factors are influencing each other. So what are the driving factors and what are the rather driven factors? And this is very relevant information to develop strategies that intended to bring about some change. In the next step, we developed so-called projections for these influencing factors. So we identified possible trends, how they might evolve in the future. And in the last step, we elaborated scenario narratives, how the leather sector could look like in 2035. And we had 2 different stories. One story was more like a business as usual scenario, and the other scenario was a ambitious, positive scenario, where you can say that in 2035, the leather sector has finally achieved more sustainable chemistry. And what happened in this process was that first, with the first process steps, we created something like a common view of the challenges. And in the second step, we created a common goal, because the final step was, in view of those 2 separate scenarios, the group chose which one is the one that we want to work for. And of course, we chose the more positive one. And so there was also a common goal for the sector as a result of this process. And in this slide, I will now briefly summarize a bit what are the topics of those scenario. As you can see here on the top, that transparency and knowledge
Julian?
about the
Sorry, there are no slides shown. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Since when?
Since the beginning, in fact.
Okay, that's a problem. I thought I got the feedback that you see slides. Oh.
Yes, now I can see your slides.
Okay, that's not a big problem. So I'm happy that you can see this slide here. As you can see, and now you really can see, that transparency and knowledge about chemicals and products and supply chains, this will be one of the driving aspects in this future scenario. And how will it be possible in 2035 to have this more transparency and knowledge? One factor that drives this change is that the supply chains will have created infrastructures to the capacities to create the data, the information about chemicals and products and processes. And this information is also of use for the brands and retailers who can inform consumers about the chemicals and products, who can then adapt their consumption behavior. And brands can also use this information to make more informed demands to their suppliers. So this is also an incentive for product innovation in the leather sector and also in the chemical sector. And another relevant development is that in the global south, people will no more accept those dirty production processes. So there will also be a change, and this will be also recognized by their legislators. So the legislation and also the enforcement of legislation in such places will change in the global south, but of course also in the European Union. So the anticipation was that all the regulations on substances in articles, this topic will increase. And as you know, this is also what happened most recently with the European Green Deal. So in fact, the scenario anticipated a lot of the legislation that is now being prepared by the European Commission. So, and the process overview goes on. So we have now the scenario, and what is then interesting, how can we move towards the scenario? So the next step was to develop strategies and to identify concrete action steps. And by action steps, we mean specific project ideas, because we wanted to develop solution approaches to work towards the scenario. And we had 12 ideas for such project, but not so many resources to do all of the projects. So we did a survey among the participants of the project who could choose those sub-projects of which they assumed that they would have the highest impact on the scenario and which they personally also find interesting. And these are the 4 sub-projects that were polled in this process, on harmonization of standards, on IT tools and governance for traceability of chemicals, a sub-project on chemicals and process innovation, and a sub-project on leather design guidelines for sustainable development. And if we put those 4 sub-projects now in a bigger picture, this is what we call a theory of change. The idea is that with the outputs of this sub-projects, we will create effects in society and along supply chains that in the long run will have this impact in the sense of the target scenario that we have developed. So, and the process continues. We started those sub-projects at the end of 2020, and those sub-projects are basically working until today. And this is what this conference today is about, to show you the main results of those sub-projects. And at the end, as a small outlook, we can present to you a new process on guidelines or guiding principles on more sustainable leather chemistry, something that we worked on in the last weeks. And with that, I once more want to repeat that, yes, we can work it out, a more sustainable chemistry in the leather supply chains, and I hope you enjoy the following inputs by my colleagues.